Let me tell you about the most successful piece of guilt-based marketing in the history of the American economy. It is not a product. It is not an investment. It is a small screen that rotates toward you at the point of sale, displays 3 suggested tip amounts starting at 20%, and then puts a 4th option at the bottom that says, "No tip" in the smallest font the designer was allowed to use. And in that moment, with the cashier standing 2 feet away, you are not making a free choice. You are being socially coerced into subsidizing a wage that someone else was supposed to pay. And you have been trained to call it generosity. Here is what tipping actually is. The federal tipped minimum wage in the United States has been $2.13 per HR since 1991. 1991. That number has not moved in over 30 years, while the regular federal minimum wage has been raised 7 times. The logic is, tips make up the difference. And if they don't, the employer is supposed to top it off. Supposed to. Because enforcement of that rule is, charitably speaking, about as reliable as a weather forecast for a week from Thursday. So in practice, what you have is a system where tipped workers earn $2.13 from their employer, and the rest of their income depends on the generosity of strangers. The size of the bill, the day of the week, how attractive they are, what neighborhood they work in, and whether the customer is having a good day. That is not a compensation system. That is a lottery with a uniform and a smile requirement. And the people running the lottery are the restaurants. Because here is the part nobody explains at the iPad kiosk. When you tip, you are not adding money to the restaurant's revenue. You are replacing money the restaurant would otherwise have to pay. Every dollar you leave on the table is a dollar the employer does not have to budget for. The tip doesn't supplement the wage, it is the wage. And you volunteered to pay it. To understand how this became normal, you have to go back to the aftermath of the Civil War, because tipping in America has a history that most people would find uncomfortable if they knew it. Tipping was actually considered a vaguely un-American practice in the 19th century. Critics at the time called it aristocratic, the kind of thing Europeans did to signal class hierarchy. There was even an anti-tipping Society of America founded in 1904, with over 100,000 members who pledged not to tip. 7 states banned the practice entirely in the early 1900s. Then something changed. After emancipation, a wave of newly freed Black Americans entered the service workforce in hotels, railroads, and restaurants. And the businesses that employed them found a convenient solution to the problem of paying wages to workers they previously hadn't paid at all. They simply didn't, or they paid next to nothing. And they told customers that tipping was customary. The Pullman Company, which operated the most famous luxury rail cars in the country, became the largest employer of Black Americans in the nation. Their porters earned almost nothing in base wages. They were explicitly told to cultivate tips. The business model was, customers pay the staff. We keep the ticket revenue. That structure, born from the economics of exploitation, became the blueprint for the modern American tipping system. And it was codified into federal law in 1938 when the Fair Labor Standards Act established a minimum wage with a specific carve-out for tipped workers. The carve-out said, if your workers receive tips, you don't have to pay them as much. That carve-out is still there. 87 years later, $2.13 an hour, still there. And the restaurant industry has spent enormous resources making sure it stays there. The National Restaurant Association, which some workers have nicknamed the other NRA, has lobbied against every significant effort to eliminate the tipped minimum wage at the federal level. They spent over $3 million lobbying in 2023 alone, because the current system saves the industry billions of dollars annually that would otherwise come out of their operating costs and go to their employees instead. Now here is the part where it gets structurally absurd. Because even if you are a generous tipper, even if you always do 25%, even if you tip at the coffee counter, and the takeout window and the hotel front desk, and the iPad at the yogurt place, the system still might not be delivering that money to the person you intended it for. Tip pooling is legal in most states, which means the tip you left for your server may be shared with the kitchen, the host, the busser, and in some arrangements, depending on local law, even supervisors or managers, which is not inherently wrong. Kitchen staff are underpaid too, but it is a layer of complexity between your generosity and its destination that you are not informed about and did not consent to. And then there is the credit card fee. When you tip on a card, the restaurant pays a processing fee, typically between 1.5% and 3.5% of the transaction. In some states and some arrangements, that processing fee is passed through to the tipped employees, meaning the worker who received a $10 tip on a card might net $9.65 after the processor takes its cut. You tipped, the credit card company also got paid. The worker got slightly less than you intended. Again, not a conspiracy. Just a system where every intermediary extracts something, and the person at the bottom of the chain absorbs whatever is left after the extraction. And now, that system is spreading, because tipping has left the restaurant, and it is colonizing everything. The touchscreen tip prompt has appeared at coffee counters, juice bars, self-checkout kiosks, airport newsstands, online checkout flows, food delivery apps, and in at least one reported case, a vending machine. The average tip request in 2019 was around 15 to 18%. By 2023, the suggested floor had quietly become 20%, with some iPad prompts starting at 25%, 30%, or even 35% as the lowest suggested option. This is not because service improved. It is because the software that runs the kiosk was updated to default to a higher number, and most people click the middle button. Behavioral economists call this anchoring. Restaurants and tech platforms call it a revenue strategy. You call it leaving a tip. Here is the mechanism that ties all of this together. Tipping functions as a psychological transfer of employer obligation onto the customer through social pressure. The restaurant designs the environment, sets the prices, controls the staffing levels, manages the pace of service, and then, at the final moment of the transaction, removes itself from the compensation equation entirely and points at you. It is the economic equivalent of a construction company building a road and then charging the people who walk on it to pay the workers who built it. The company already got paid. It just decided that workers were your problem, not theirs. And the social machinery that enforces this system is guilt. Guilt that someone who works hard and earns little will go home with less money because you clicked no tip, which is real and which is intentional. Because the genius of the tipping system is that it turns the customer into the enforcer of a compensation structure they didn't design, didn't agree to, and benefit nothing from maintaining. You aren't being generous, you are being useful. Now, the counter-argument is that good servers can out-earn a flat wage in a high-volume restaurant. And in some cases, that is true. In fine dining, in busy urban markets, skilled servers in peak hours can clear significant income. But that argument is doing a lot of work for a very small percentage of the tipped workforce. The median annual wage for a tipped food service worker in America is around $27,000 to $30,000, which before taxes and tip-outs puts them roughly at or below what a salaried employee at the federal minimum wage would earn. And unlike a salaried employee, they can't predict it, they can't budget for it, they can't negotiate it, they can only hope for it. 7 states have eliminated the tipped minimum wage and require employers to pay tipped workers the full state minimum: California, Washington, Oregon, Minnesota, Montana, Alaska, and Nevada. And in those states, tipping still exists. Restaurants have not all gone out of business, and servers have reported more stable, predictable income. The sky did not fall, the pasta did not stop arriving at the table. It just cost the restaurant more to serve it, which is, in the end, the point. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The tipping system is not a flaw in the American service economy. It is a design choice made by businesses to offload labor costs onto the social conscience of customers, enforced by federal law that hasn't been updated since 1991, and now being quietly expanded by software companies selling point-of-sale systems to every industry that sells anything. And the people who suffer the most from its unpredictability are not the servers in Manhattan's most expensive restaurants. They are the tipped workers and slow diners in rural counties, the hotel housekeepers who almost never see a tip, the delivery drivers navigating the algorithm's demand surge pricing, and the millions of workers whose income depends on whether a stranger is in a good mood on a Tuesday afternoon in February. The system was built to make labor cheap for businesses. It was sold to you as an opportunity to reward good service. Those are not the same product. And every time you tap 20% on a touchscreen because the cashier is standing 2 feet away, you are not expressing generosity. You are completing a transaction that someone else designed so they would not have to. So tell me where you land on this. Is tipping a system worth keeping because it lets great service get rewarded in a way a flat wage never could? Or is it a guilt machine that American businesses invented to make customers pay for their own labor costs while calling it culture? Drop it in the comments because this one tends to get heated. And if you've ever worked a tipped job, I especially want to hear from you.